Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Lauren Johnson, I'm a senior reporter at Business Insider, and today we have 30 minutes to talk about all things CTV, which will be exciting. I'm going to do some quick intros real quick, and just as a bit of housekeeping, if we have a minute or two at the end, we'll possibly answer a couple questions, but we only have 30 minutes, so we're going to try to keep this moving a little bit today. So here we have Huda Kazi. She is the VP of Ad Technology and Operations at Warner Brothers Discovery. Then we have Jason DeMarco, VP of CTV at Index Exchange. Katie Barrett, Head of Programmatic at LG Ads. And Georgina Thomson, Head of Programmatic at OMD. So to sort of like set the stage and get us thinking about CTV, I thought it could be a good question to ask everyone, sort of get a feel for how advertisers are approaching CTV in terms of where the investment is these days between linear and CTV. How do you make sense of that? And that sort of thing. Georgina, do you want to kick us off?
Definitely, great question. I think it varies heavily. And a lot of times, I'm sure this will come up as an answer as we go through these questions, planning tools are what we want to turn to be able to figure that out. But I think where we are right now is it's very audience focused. It's who are we trying to reach and what are they consuming? And what touch points are they paying attention to, so to speak. And I think that's really where we lean in to try and get that right mix. But then also being able to be flexible and move that around as a campaign goes on so that we can understand how we're delivering the media to the audience we want to deliver it to and be able to pivot if that's not working.
Katie?
You know, I think there's a lot of varying opinions out there when it comes to linear versus streaming. There's 80-20, there's rule of 40, and our opinion is, you know, your customer and the data that you have on that customer should really decide your mix. So whether that's our data, which is ACR data, understanding the entire consumer journey across the television, or your own first-party data or another company's data, really let that data decide, because it's an ever-changing fragmentation, and if you're applying, like, you know, a quick quip of how you're going to buy it, it's not necessarily how your customer is consuming. And so how does data lead with data?
Jason, what are you noticing with your clients?
It's the living room at the end of the day. So whether it's linear or CTV or streaming, it's the experience, it's the large screen, it's engagement. What we learned during the pandemic is that kind of the flexibility and responsiveness of programmatic in CTV and streaming allows marketers and advertisers to kind of optimize more quickly than they do in linear. So I think the pandemic obviously accelerated the viewership, which has accelerated the ad spend into streaming and CTV. But I think there still needs to be a balance between linear, where there's audiences that are obviously still watching and viewing. It's one of the largest mediums, but you need the balance, and you need to find your audiences wherever they are. So.
Anything you see with your clients?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Jason. I think people bought a lot of TVs during the pandemic and leaned in both on linear television as well as streaming television. It really is about like where your users are and where you can get the most bang for your buck, whether that is with reach and efficiency or super targeted, you know, soup to nuts reporting to understand what the ROI was on your spend. So I think linear is still here, but there's a trend moving towards CTV.
Everybody kind of commented on, and Huda said bang for your buck, but talked about ACR data, talked about the audience. At the end of the day, the effective CPM, or the efficiency that you can get in a streaming environment that's one-to-one, and the dynamic kind of responsiveness to it, obviously is driving more value, but it's a matter of how do you baseline it and compare it to your kind of legacy spend. So I think we're making progress.
Is there any sort of divide in terms of how much is bot direct versus programmatic? Or how you kind of think about that? Okay, again, maybe it's perspective.
We at OMD are very programmatic first. At the end of the day, we want to be buying what's best for our client's campaign, but I think the insight and control we get out of programmatic makes it an easy kind of programmatic makes sense for this. So I think it then comes down to access points and making sure we can actually access the inventory we want to be buying programmatically. But from that standpoint, we do see substantial value going that way, and it's something that we try to do with every buy.
It's interesting.
And I would say we haven't, you know, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it does matter, obviously, but it's what the customer wants. And so that's what matters most to us. So if you're going to buy direct, we have the same products that will sell you on a programmatic basis. And so, you know,
I think as a buyer, that's nice to hear. And it's the kind of thing we want the option. Because like I said, it's really just that holistic control that we get when we can buy programmatically that adds the value.
Totally, not strong holding you to do
Exactly.
one thing where it's like, I'm going to give you better inventory if you come to this side. So
Exactly.
as we're all sitting up here, it's all going to go in the direction of automation to begin with, so we might as well give our consumers what they want, which is the best inventory with the best data.
Katie makes a really important point, right? It's about the execution of the campaign. It's about workflow and automation. It's not necessarily a buying behavior. It's whatever works for the client, whatever is going to drive the best outcome or results. The next step is we have to get publishers and inventory to standardize the way that they surface the kind of content and the whether it be macros or different signals and things like that to create an equal playing field. That way direct and programmatic can actually operate with fluidity between each other.
You're talking about the content, to be
Content,
clear
right?
between
the way
the
it's
two of
surfaced
them.
and represented in bid requests or reporting and so on.
You want to be able to understand what you're buying
Correct.
in the same way that a direct buyer can understand what they're buying.
How are you sort of approaching that, I guess, as the publisher from Warner?
As the publisher. So
Warner and Discovery?
we're a very programmatic forward business. We really lean into programmatic. It is a core pillar of how we execute. And we tend to surface up as much as we can because the more information that we provide, the better the bid. There are going to be some things that we want to keep for our direct business, but overall, we want programmatic spend. We want ads that are engaging for our customers, that are relevant for our customers, because no one really complains about advertising that matters to them. They want to see ads that mean something. They want a reminder that, hey, I need to go restock my cleaning supplies. So we want to be able to find the advertiser that matches the user. And the best way for us to do that is to be able to tell through those programmatic channels the buyer as much information as we reasonably can so that they can find that match. Works well for the buyer because they get that ROI that they're looking for. Works well for us because we deliver an engaging, enriching experience for our customers.
It's music to my ears, right? Relevant ads that are driving better performance. But really, it's about the user experience at the end of the day. Those are your consumers. Those are your viewers, right? They're what is essentially propelling this entire ecosystem. So if we can make their experience that much more relevant and enjoyable, we're going to continue to benefit from it.
I don't want to see a Subaru ad in every pod. I want it to be diverse.
I don't need diaper ads anymore.
Right, and I want to make sure that the buyers know, hey, you just served up this Subaru ad. Please don't serve it again.
Georgina, how does the content play a role in how you think about what they're talking about in terms of how you invest?
It's extremely important, and I think across the board, it's sort of the more transparency we can get into the content we're buying, the better we can deliver an ad experience to the consumer. So I think it's sort of, that really kind of goes in with the access to transparency and data to help us control that buy so we know what we're buying, right down to the impression level. We know where it's showing up, and we can really kind of manage that experience, not necessarily from a cherry pick standpoint. I'd say it's more from a quality control side, so we can manage frequency and we're not annoying our consumers out there.
What do you think needs to change from the consumer ad experience from what it is now? I mean, you mentioned bombarding. Frequency capping is still obviously a big issue when it comes to CTV. How are you sort of thinking about that? What needs to change from that perspective? Can it change from that perspective? I'd be curious about thoughts on frequency capping.
Yeah, it's still it's incredibly important. We want to eliminate waste on buys of over frequency, but I think it's an interesting time right now with all the different touch points, outlets, streaming providers right now, where it's sort of working through whether it's syndicated properties or, walled gardens. It's just really kind of figuring out how we can make sure we're not over-delivering to one user, and working on measurement solutions as well that help us manage that.
Interesting.
I think the consumer experience is one of the things that is so enticing about streaming, especially AVOD streaming. So if you're watching linear TV, you're going to be watching almost as much commercials as your content, where depending on who you're working with, like for us, our fast channels, which are our O&O, that are LG channels that are 350 linear-like stations on our TVs, it's a 2-minute ad load every 30 minutes. So it's a very light, non-intrusive, while you're getting quality content into your house for free. And so as we continue to create more experiences for us, and on the OEM end, it's really the TV becoming a hub and making that kind of content available, and the consumers joining in, and we're seeing, a behavior that's shifting because of it. People are putting less dongles into their TV. They have less of a need. The dongles going the way of the DVD. And so as this consumer experience is moving into operating systems on smart TVs, and we continue to make that experience better, it's something that, I think that's really where the future is going.
It's also worth noting that LG is one of the OEMs that's very leaned into kind of breaking down the fragmentation, right? Understanding that the fragmentation in the walled gardens and how everybody's operating kind of independent of each other isn't helping with the user experience. So I think as LG and some other OEMs and device manufacturers kind of lean into, whether it be standardization or some form of a unified ID or control over frequency capping, it's going to improve the entire ecosystem.
We've had the wonderfulness of being the later entrance OEM, and so instead of being a walled garden, we decided, let's be a gated community. We have our data, and we selectively let it in and out. And one of those selections is our partnership with iSpot to help create better holistic measurement. We're not in the business of doing that, and so why not give our data to someone who can, back to that old saying, not grade our own homework or be our own referee and goalie at the same time, and create better holistic measurement for the industry as a whole.
Would you be open to having other types of currencies, just to follow up with that, in addition to iSpot? We can talk about measurement here in a second in general. But just curious about sort of the idea of like having multiple, licensing that out, in other words, to lots of different companies.
I think there's possibilities for anything.
It's worth noting that LG is not late to the game. Similar to Index with CTV, we're second movers, so we're able to capitalize on what we learned the first go round. I think that's why some of the ideas that you guys have are really important. With the currency, we've seen in TV the kind of option for alternative currencies, and nothing's really taken off yet. Eventually, but it goes back to standardization. And how do you replace the current currency without having a baseline that you're going to match to, right? It's always going to be apples to oranges, so.
Yeah, as much as I'm excited about alternative currencies, I like to think about alternative currencies similar to blockchain. Everyone loves to talk about it, but no one knows what to do with it. And so
Keeps us relevant.
So who sort of wins then in that case with measurement, if it's not some of these alternative currencies?
I think that's the question about it.
I think Jason hit on it. It's sort of, there is no clear winner right now. So from the buy side, we're really sort of pushing to get the signal consistency, transparency into it, so we can start not only measuring, but it being able to plan properly as well. We've got great solutions in place right now, but I don't think anybody's completely there yet. So it's really kind of how do we get that access to be able to understand that program level data so we can start measuring, planning, and optimizing that full cycle with it.
How are you approaching that? Are you doing actual tests, in other words, with alternative currencies for clients? Or like how do you sort of
there's definitely testing happening. And I think it's still heading towards that, what is that answer? And we're kind of looking at a client-by-client basis.
And there doesn't have to be one currency, right?
Yep.
Nielsen did that for whatever it was, 40, 50 years in TV. But in the streaming space and kind of this commingled or blanking on the term, but multi-platform, it doesn't have to be one currency. There's room for a few. But it's a matter of making sure that the marketers are informed and educated as to how to do the comparison.
Definitely.
Right? And how do we price it? How do we properly monetize the inventory?
Yeah, and it's cross-screen. It's not TV, it's video. And how are we reaching the consumer, and how are we factoring in all the different touch points that they could consume that in, and should they be weighted the same? Should they not? And I think those are some of the questions we're looking at right now. But again, it's a campaign, but it can be a campaign by campaign basis, depending on what you're actually trying to do.
Got it.
We do have to be careful about fragmentation, though, because if we have lots and lots of different currencies and everyone's measuring a different way, we start to fragment the supply. So from where I'm sitting, consistency is a good thing.
Can you do it? You mentioned sort of the campaign by campaign basis. What about any sort of like bigger upfront buy? How are you thinking about or a digital buy? For that matter, it doesn't have to be an upfront, but just like a bigger buy when it comes to currencies in that regard.
Well, my thought is we're not in a winner-takes-all game for streaming. We're still, we've gone from being toddlers to teenagers, and to that point, I think I personally think like currencies for what is best for your business are going to make more sense. Now, I understand where you're coming from, but at the same time, when you start to buy currencies based on business outcomes, so if I'm a QSR, did people walk into the store? If I am a website, did people come to visit? And not necessarily creating all CTV as a performance, but putting better business outcomes versus demo alone, it's going to get you to a better, outcome for your business. And so whatever currencies are going to be best to understand that outcome, data-driven are, in my mind, a really good place to start from an alternative point of view.
I would agree with that. I just think that there's a happy medium between 1 and 100.
Agreed. I think it also is what's the role of video on this campaign, and I think that can be tied to outcomes with all the different ad formats we have coming out with video too. The interactiveness of it that didn't exist in the past kind of makes us question whether we should redefine some of those different types of buys.
Right, we can't go totally away from brand awareness campaigns. They still have to be part of the marketing mix.
Yep.
Right? And I think Katie makes a good point that streaming in the beginning was all about performance. We might have kind of bottlenecked ourselves a little bit, but we're obviously seeing a transition into multi-currency, maybe not too many currencies, but at least 2, which are driving the performance outcomes and the brand awareness.
I think there just needs to be a level setting across the board from a linear perspective, right? So linear has been left to run as an awareness play without that much guardrails, where streaming, to your point, has been kind of given more of a performance lens. And so we can kind of bring them together and balance them out, especially given where the audiences are between the two. You're going to, as a brand marketer, build more awareness and have better results. It's, back to finding that right mix.
What happens to Nielsen, sort of in the move to streaming TV and OTT?
There's no clear winner right now. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
We've been asking that question for 5 years.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it was 5 years ago when they started reissuing a bunch of numbers, and it was putting the cable and broadcast kind of space a little bit uneasy because there was confidence in the numbers for 40 years. And anytime they would have to reissue, it made people uncomfortable. But they're still relevant. They're still the biggest measurement when you look at total scale, right, across streaming and TV from a kind of screen perspective. I don't think they're going away. I think it's about alternative options based on what the objective of the campaign is. If you need to sell iced coffee this weekend, Nielsen's probably not the best way to go about it. You're going to look at more one-to-one and addressable type targeting and measurement on the outcome based. But if you're, going back to the diaper thing, if you're selling diapers or toilet paper, yeah, the standard demo might work better for you. So there's room for everybody.
Yep.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit about just like what standards look like right now, also in OTT, in terms of like where some of that is at, what stuff is sort of in the pipeline and what people are working on, that sort of thing. I know, Jason, you have some thoughts on that.
OpenRTP 2.6 is how we're going to get to a better set of standards in CTV and streaming. We haven't gotten there yet. Everybody kind of establishes their own standards, whether it's content object and genre taxonomies that are being decided by individual publishers or DSPs. But with OpenRTP 2.6, there are a set of kind of standards, and the industry has come to agreement on really important macros and signals that are now going to be surfaced and basically recognized, reported on, actioned on with standards, with kind of a similar approach to all of it. So I think it's a big move. It's been necessary for the last few years, but we've seen organic growth just based on scale and how much audience has moved. Now it's a matter of trying to make it more effective ad spend and more effective kind of yield and efficiency on both sides.
So what's keeping that from being
just adoption at this point? It was released a couple months ago, so now it's a matter of adoption. It'll probably take 12 to 18 months for critical mass to adopt it, but and implement it. But it's a step in the right direction, a big step in the right direction.
How do you talk to advertisers about standards and this whole?
I feel like I say a lot. It doesn't matter if I if I throw the signal, if no one's there to catch it. So having a new set of standards that will enable everyone to catch it in the same way, because we can't throw it differently to different buyers, is going to be, to Jason's point, a huge step forward in enabling us to surface more supply in a way that is meaningful to the buyers.
I agree. We've been asking for it for years at OMD. We want this standardization because I think it not only helps us understand all the different data signals of what we're buying, but those uniform data points inform our measurement, our planning, and the whole entire cycle. So the more we can standardize that, the more we can start to understand a lot more granularity across the board and everything. We can start making better decisions with it.
Yeah, on our end, we pass back everything we're given. So if we're given more, we'll pass back more.
Great. Do data strategies at all, I guess, vary by platform nowadays, and how are you seeing that sort of shake out, and how are you approaching that? Georgina, you might have some thoughts on that too.
It's an interesting question. I think we're seeing a lot of our leading platforms taking different stances on it, which really kind of affects the way we choose a platform. But it's also, when it comes down to it, you've got multiple steps. There's the network, the SSP, and the DSP. So when we're targeting, we've tried different ways to do that, whether it's through the DSP, through the SSP, through different sort of clean room approaches and really understanding our audiences there. Again, broken record, the word consistency, it's great, we want that. And it really kind of helps us audience, like true programmatic, biddable audience target across multiple outlets.
Anybody else have thoughts on platforms and data strategies?
You go.
Katie?
I'm going to throw that one to you.
It varies by platform, right? Because you have some platforms that have very strong proprietary information because they own the relationship to the viewer, whether it's through login data or some form of a subscription, right? Whether it be Amazon or Google or Roku. But then you have folks like LG and Samsung and the other OEMs that have a different type of relationship with the consumer. They also are able to make decisions based on behavioral attributes and kind of viewership habits and things like that. But then you have TV programmers that are building apps into the different platforms, and they have a whole other set of data. Whether it's sign up through email newsletters or some form of a subscription. And I'm talking independent of the distribution companies, which is another set of kind of targeting capabilities. So definitely varies by platform, varies by inventory source, right? Who owns the content and is putting it forth to the consumer. But that doesn't necessarily, that fragmentation, while it's frustrating, I'm sure, it doesn't limit us from being able to scale at this point.
Yep.
How do you think that from your perspective? Because you do, as Jason just mentioned, you do distribute content through all these different platforms. How does that play a role in what data advertisers get, basically?
I think the data that's most in our control is going to be our first-party data. And so I am kind of interested to see like the rise of the first-party data and clean rooms, and how do we get that to scale across the board so that, again, we can find something meaningful for our buyers and our clients. Third-party data is less within our control. Like, we're not an OEM. We don't necessarily have the full control of the device, but we do know who subscribes to our services, who signs up for our newsletters, and the full scale of our footprint. That's valuable information that we can find, like we're looking at finding ways to make accessible to our buyers in a privacy compliant way, where we're not selling anyone's personal data, we're just finding good matches. Because at the end of the day, it's about finding good matches between the consumer who is viewing the content and the advertiser who is trying to market their brand.
It goes back to Huda's comment earlier about relevancy. Put relevant ads in front of the consumer, the viewer, and they're going to be more likely to continue to engage with the content and the platforms, which is going to drive the advertising and the budgets, and that ultimately allows us to license new content and make better shows. So it's kind of it's a flywheel effect, but it's all about relevancy and kind of continuity.
And I think it's an interesting fact that we're seeing is that consumers like relevant ads, and what consumers, we live in a world where we're trying to find people with advertising, and we've been told for so long that consumers hate advertising. But you know what they hate more? Paying for 10 subscriptions. And so if you can make the ads relevant within AVOD, the consumer is much more appreciative of it these days than they were, say, 5 years ago.
I don't really think consumers hate advertising so much as they hate super disruptive experiences. So to your point earlier about how many ads you watch per half hour, like if you have a 60-second pod, that's just long enough for the advertisers to shine and to, like you sit through 60 seconds and you're back to content. It's not a very long break. And I know there have been times where I've rewound content to watch the ad again because the ad was super relevant to me. And maybe that's just because I work in advertising. But I do think that customers connect with ads that matter to them. And that's why, like, as much as we all talk about, being targeted with advertising, there's a balance, because if we can find a way to surface the brands that are important and relevant to the customer, it's good for the customer and it's good for the brand.
I talk about this often with advertisers where, someone will come to you and say, well, there's an over-frequency problem in CTV. And then they'll name off of a couple of brands who, like, they're telco companies or insurance companies. And you'll, have to stop and have a conversation with them about that, because their model is to serve you as many ads as they possibly can, so that when you're making that decision to get new insurance or to switch carriers, that brand is the first one that comes to mind. That's not a technology error. That is a frequency by design. And I think a lot of people confuse what's going on in streaming, because CTV allows you to control your frequency.
I was going to say it's a controlled decision. It's not an over frequency. And I think as long as we're able to deliver the amount we want to deliver, then we're doing the right thing, but we need those signals to be able to do that.
In terms of the price question we just mentioned a second ago, as people have more subscriptions and they're paying for all these different AVOD services, how do you see that sort of playing out for advertisers when it does come to things like frequency capping, or this idea that consumers just have a bigger, they're paying for more services these days?
We hit the consumer threshold really quickly, right? It was only a few years, and all of a sudden you're seeing AVOD come into play with the SVOD platforms, because to the point that was made, we've maxed out the consumer's pocketbook, basically. I think the relevancy of ads, and like I said earlier, the flywheel effect that happens through the money coming into the ecosystem and creating better content is what's going to drive, I think, the continued move towards advertising, ad-supported.
Okay.
It gives customers choice. Not everyone can do the premium subscription services, but you can do a combination of a premium subscription service and an AVOD service and a FAST service. And some people are willing to watch a little bit more advertising to be able to access content for free.
Do you think any of that would play out as we sort of think about an economic downturn, possible recession? How does that sort of impact CTV ad spend? Thoughts on that?
I think, the first place it's going to have an effect is on those consumers who are buying too many subscriptions, right? You can easily cut. If you were buying 5, you can go down to 2. Or if they're offering ad-supported alternatives, that's another way to cut costs. So I think what we're going to see is more advertising opportunities or inventory opportunities coming to the marketplace. I mean, we already are.
If the pandemic taught us that advertising shifted a little bit away from TV into streaming based on following the viewer and following the kind of the effectiveness and efficiency and what was driving the flexibility for the marketers. If there's an economic downturn, I think something similar will happen, where the marketers need to have the flexibility to be responsive to how a campaign is performing, but also how the product is moving off shelves. So I think what we learned in 2020 will probably help sustain the CTV and streaming marketplace if we do continue to have this kind of economic downturn over the next, hopefully, few months, not.
I agree, and I think to kind of bring it full circle, it's that programmatic or not conversation, and the more flexibility we kind of need these days, the more in favor of operating programmatically we're seeing across the board. And it's just sort of, you brought up sort of stock on shelves. That's a real problem these days, and being able to kind of react to that in real time is a huge advantage.
Okay, I'm going to throw in one more question here at the end, which is about Netflix. How are you all seeing, how big of a impact do you expect Netflix rolling out ads within the next couple months here to have on the industry? Real quick thoughts.
Scale. It'll be interesting to see what the scale looks like.
I think it's good for the industry overall. I think the buy-in and the CPM are pretty hard to stomach, so it's going to be interesting to see who goes there first.
it was said earlier, all boats rise, right? So if Netflix is going to bring an ad-supported scenario to the CTV and streaming space, it's hopefully going to drive more advertising. TV has seen such a downward turn in subscribers and viewership that the dollars are getting caught up and not being able to be placed and spent because digital hasn't created enough volume to replace it because of the one-to-one versus one-to-many. Netflix, I think, helps create that kind of constant movement of dollars again. And it's not like they're going to come in and take everybody's money, right? I think it'll help the entire ecosystem to just bring more money in and operate a little bit better.
And it does seem by design that they're going after linear dollars with bringing Nielsen and DAR and going demo.
Right.
It'll
That's
maybe
all the
make people
time
more
we have, but thank you so much, everybody,
comfortable
for
with
joining.
programmatic.
Thank you.